Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. I'm excited to share a conversation that I got to have with Isa. Isa is wrapping up her training as a licensed professional counselor. She's currently working in schools with teenagers, and she offers some really great helpful insight on how to help kids and teens with technology use. She talks about some of the things that she's seeing in schools that teenagers are dealing with, what to do with when your kid has a first exposure to illicit content, as well as when is the right time to let your teenager have social media. We cover that and more. I think you'll get a lot from this conversation that I got to have with Isa. Well, hi, Isa. Thanks for coming on to the Ridge Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah, got to sleep in today. Spring break and all that. Yeah,
big day.
Yeah, good stuff.
I got to sleep in theoretically this last Saturday, and then I forgot to turn off my alarm. So classic mistake there, but. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So I am a licensed professional counselor in training. I work for New Life Resources, which the Ridge works with often. Right now I'm working in the schools. I work on the north side of Milwaukee in the Hope schools in Semper. And I work with kids from like kindergarten all the way through 8th grade currently. And then I've worked with kids and teens basically, since they allowed me to help at the Ridge when I was like 12 years old. So I just always have liked working with kids. And then now teens are really my favorites, but I like them all. They're all fun.
Yeah. What made you decide to get into counseling and go through? I know it's a lot of schooling and training and all that stuff. And I know you don't get like a ton of hours of like clinicals, or I'm not sure. Is that what it's called? Is that, yeah.
I mean, it's not called clinic. Well, maybe it's called clinicals, but it's essentially the same thing as like the medical thing where you have to get, we have to get like 3,000 hours. So when I was getting my master's, I had to get, I think 1,000 hours in an internship, and now I'm working on my 3,000 hours after with like my training license. So it's a lot of hours, but it's also fun hours because I get to actually practice now instead of just doing the book work. Yeah. But yeah, I got into it. We had a friend way back, and they were fostering some kids, and I was just seeing the struggle that this one kiddo of theirs was having just with this transition and these mental health concerns that I hadn't really like seen before in my life up until that point. And I just started learning more about mental health in general, and it really intrigued me. And then, I looked into going back into school and found a school that wasn't like solely based on test taking, because that's not my favorite. So then I was willing to go back to school, and got all schooling in, licensed up, and I feel like each step of the way God's been like, this is where you're meant to be. You're supposed to be working with kids and teens, and like he just keeps equipping me with new challenges and things like that along the way, which has been super cool.
Yeah. Before we dive into the specifics, I'm curious, as you went through, like, as you're getting your training, as you're learning all this stuff, was there anything that really stood out to you as like maybe something that was surprising? And we could say in the kids and teens realm, but that you're like, oh wow, I hadn't really considered that before or thought of that before, or was there anything like that?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of little things that come up along the way. I don't know. you get less surprised the longer you've been in the field, I feel like. But each step of the way, I feel like there's been new things I've been learning, and I think the teens especially are an age of development where they just kind of get like overlooked because they're right in between being a kid and an adult. But they've got so much going on, like in their brains developmentally, and then just with like school and trying to get into the adult world and all of the tasks of being challenged to be a kid, but also being challenged to be an adult all the time. So I think they just, there's just so much out there that they're facing. Yeah. And
Well, I mean, and we kind of focus for our conversation specifically on how I'm sure technology is having a huge impact on that. I don't think, I mean, technology is not new. I mean, technology's been around for a while and screens and all that stuff, but I feel like the amount of access to not only screens, but just information and disinformation and other kids and teenagers and is all there. But maybe we could start off. Why do you think like tech use, technology use is an important thing to talk about when it comes to kids and teens?
Yeah, I definitely think it's an important thing to talk about. For one, I think like the times have changed so quickly with technology and just like the rampant like progress that's been made over the years. So I think from like when I was a teenager, it's already changed so much in the past like 15, 20 years. And the people who are parenting right now don't necessarily like have the full experience of what it's like to be a teen or a kid growing up with access to all of this technology and social media and all the pressures to be on technology and social media. I mean, like a year ago, my 3-year-old asked me when he was going to get a phone. And I was like, you don't need a phone. I mean, and
wow.
I mean, each kid's different and you all got your own stories. Like, you know, some 3-year-olds might have a phone, but my kid certainly has no need for one. So, yeah.
Wow. So,
it's out there.
Yeah, you talk about the more like the access, like the pressure to have it. Is that something that you're seeing? And I'm sure a lot of the kids and teenagers you talk to, like what do you feel like is the percentage? Like how many have access to a phone versus maybe don't?
I mean, gosh, I'd say the majority of teenagers have a phone, if not like all of them have a phone that at least that I'm like interacting with. Obviously that's a small portion of the population, but
yeah,
I think between like parents' anxiety of them not having a phone, which I completely understand, like you want to know where your kid's at, you want to have access to them, be able to contact them at school if there's an emergency. And then also just like the social pressure of like, I'm not going to be able to contact my friends without this phone. So I think, all the teens I've interacted with either have a phone or they have access to one that they regularly use. Younger kids, it's hit or miss as to when. It kind of seems like it depends on like the like subcultures in the school. That seems to play a big role on like how young they get it. If everybody in the school has a phone, then it's more likely that your kid's going to have a phone, it seems. So
yeah, almost like a peer pressure to have access to that or to be using it, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely some peer pressure and just culturally it's the norm. Like that's how you get access to things. I mean, even like I think of my kids' schooling, like all of the communications virtual, which is great because it's easy, but like as far as like kids getting homework and things like that, that's becoming more and more like you get homework on your Chromebook, you get homework that you either do on your phone or your like laptop at home. So I think it's just ingrained into our society to a degree.
Yeah. So when you think about all the access that kids and teenagers have, like you're saying, almost just about every teen you interact with, and if they don't have access to their phone, they vast majority of them are going to have access to a computer. Is what are the big concerns that come with that?
So first of all, like I'm not saying kids or teens shouldn't have any access to like tablets or phones or anything ever. Like I know like we have technology, we need to use it. Like it's a beautiful thing. It makes homework 1,000 times easier by and large.
Except for some of the distractions, right? Yeah.
It adds a little bit of a little hiccup, you know, by and large, it makes it easier. But yeah, there are a lot of different concerns, kind of depending on the age of the kid, and like what they have access to. So I think that's the biggest thing that like I would watch for and monitor. Like at a younger age, I would recommend that like kids are not in their rooms by themselves watching like any like YouTube or anything like that, or somewhere where they have access to like Google or any like search engine where they can just stumble onto things, because there's so much that's targeted towards young kids. I mean, between pornography and like violent video games, like they are targeting younger and younger. I know Eric's message the other day, he mentioned 8 years old is like the new age where kids have been at least exposed to pornography. And we as parents need to try to limit that, exposure, but then also be prepared to talk about that exposure, because unfortunately that's the reality we live in. So yeah, there's a lot out there.
Yeah. And what, maybe you can dive into, I don't think I have to convince anyone that, early exposure really to those things is not a harmful thing.
Sure.
But maybe could you share maybe some of the effects that those types of things, can have?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with pornography, because I think, I don't know, as a parent, like I think that's the scarier one for sure, and definitely the scarier sounding one. And I think the concerns with pornography use, obviously early exposure can have an impact on a kiddo's brain. It can be traumatic. And if it's not like dealt with right away or addressed openly, then it definitely could be kind of like buried and then cause some mental health effects down the road, which could be negative and just kind of snowball into some bigger things. So that's why I say it's important that we're open to talk about it and not just get mad. Like, I understand you're going to get mad or scared, whatever your response is. Like, that's totally understandable. Like, it's terrifying. But we need to be able to respond in a way with like just that unconditional parental love that God talks about, and just kind of hear what's going on and try to address it. And then, work with your kid to process it. I'd say for any sort of trauma, those younger kids, they're just going to repeat a lot of the stuff over and over. And we need to let that happen. Because I see a lot of parents try to be like, we got to stop talking about it because they're obsessing over it, which it can seem like that. But that's how their brains process and like understand the trauma. So they need to just keep repeating it until their brain is like, okay, like that wasn't okay, but we're going to move on. So I think in that sense of like, if a younger kid's been exposed to pornography, like just let them talk about it over and over with you in a safe place. And if they need counseling, those steps are next.
Are there, real quick, are there any specific questions that you would ask your kid when that came up, like to help them process through it and talk through it and kind of, like you said, like even giving them the space to like repeat some of the things over and over again. And I love what you're saying about like, don't bury it and hide it and almost pretend it didn't happen or punish in a specific way and then just move on, but really give them the opportunity to process through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As far as specific questions, I would say I wouldn't do any like super leading questions, like that might give them more information than they've been exposed to. Like if you're hearing them say something that they saw some content online, but you don't know what it was, I wouldn't give them like specific leading questions to like kind of fill gaps in their mind, because then they might start repeating what you're saying. And that'll just escalate both of your fears, both the kid and the parent, as to what they've been exposed to. But I would just keep any questions super like open-ended and just be like, tell me about what happened. And then when they do, you just, show them lots of love and support. I would just kind of go with like a repeated phrase to respond to their like repeated story of like, that wasn't okay. Here's what we're going to do about it for the future. If it ever happens again, this is what we're going to do. And just kind of go with like, responding to what happened in the past, what we're doing now in the present, and then what we'll do in the future to try to avoid that. And if it ever happens again, because bad things happen, we can't avoid them, like what we're going to do in the future to try to just, kind of mend that brokenness in them.
Yeah. Now, does that change depending on the age? I mean, sure it does, right? But I'm sure if there's like an older exposure, like there's probably like a different tactics for different ages, or is it kind of a similar tactic, but just like a different application?
Yeah, I think yes to both of those questions. I'd say it changes a lot, of course. As they get older, you're going through puberty, and a lot of brain changes when you hit like that 12 to 13-year-old age and on. Obviously, exposure to like sexual pornography content is going to impact them differently, because it's going to feel more real. It's going to feel like applicable to their lives and what they're going through, rather than something more distant and like scary, I guess. So the teens, I would respond probably differently to them. They might still repeat the story, but it's going to be very different. It also might be a thing where they're not going to talk to their parents about it. It's super hit or miss depending on your kiddo. But some teens are just kind of in that phase where they need a different trusted adult. If you have like a trusted family member, mentor, someone from the church, those can all be good people, a counselor, depending on what the exposure is. I mean, if it's like spilling over into like addiction territory, I definitely recommend a counselor. And that's a whole different ballgame of what it's going to do to the brain and how to, how to combat that, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, this can be my last question on this specific topic, because tech use is so broad. But is there a way to figure out, hey, my kid is addicted?
Yeah. That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one with addiction in general. There are definitely signs. Things to watch for are just, I don't know, an inability to be away from like their phone. Just what you would like consider an over dramatic response to like having time away from their phone, or like taking it away at any point if that were necessary. Other signs would be just like consistent use in closed spaces where no one's watching. And then I think eventually there's just like a lot of slip ups of conversational topics that they shouldn't know anything about. I mean, like at that age, you shouldn't know all this sexual content. And I think it becomes more obvious when they start bringing it up or making jokes about it more, that they might have some sort of exposure to it. I mean, they're going to get that in school with peers and stuff too. But if it's seeming a little too mature, like it might be something to, inquire more about. But there's
that brings up what you said previously, right? Where it's like you create the framework for having those conversations, and you bring it out into the open, to where once you like start to discover like, oh yeah, why do they know about that? Why do they know that, that phrasing? Why haven't, why are they saying those things? You can ask those questions and kind of dive deeper, and it wasn't a friend that was saying that. You found that online, and how long have you been seeing that, or those types of things? Yeah. Yeah. So we kind of dove in on that specific one. Cause I think it's super important and valuable. And I know it's a lot of parents, probably when they think about tech use, it's one of their chief things. But I know another huge one is just how the amount of screen use and technology use, whether it's social media or something else, is really impacting their like anxiety and stress, depression levels, all those things. How would you recommend a parent start to navigate like those questions? Like, oh, is this affecting my kid's mental health? Maybe we can start there.
Sure. I'd say again, it looks different in each age, like range. It changes kind of how it looks over time. The younger they are, I think my bigger concern would be the amount of screen time. Just in general, I know that can impact their like attention spans and their willingness to do other things outside of screen time. I don't think a lot of little kids have social media. I wouldn't recommend they do, but I think for them it's more time spent on the screen versus time spent outside playing, which can have mental health impacts as well as physical impacts. So I would try to limit that screen time. I know my kids are little and there are days where it's gloomy outside and you want to get stuff done around the house. So I know it happens. No judgment here. But I think we just need to be aware of it and willing to set boundaries as well as like reflect on what we're doing currently and make changes as we go. As the kids get older, I would say that social media is kind of the big concern. I'd say there is a book, The Anxious Generation, that I'm a pretty big fan of, by Jonathan Haidt. And he goes into a lot of the specifics of how depression and anxiety has changed since 2010, where like the smartphone really took off in line with that like age of teenagers and the increase of anxiety and depression has gone up by like 145%, I think, for girls and like 160 something for guys. And I mean, both were already pretty high to begin with. Yeah. So like it's just gone up in that specific age range. And he talks about the causation between, just social media use and being in that teenage developmental time. And essentially the more time they're spending on social media, the less time they're spending with like real social interactions, although that may be the intended purpose of social media. It's not what they're actually getting is the social interaction that they need and crave. And people need other people for real, not just online. So
when you're chatting with maybe teens specifically about their social media use, I know from my time working with teens, right? It's like the idea of taking a break or using social media less is like almost seems like I'll call it ruining your social life, right? And for those listening on audio, there's some quote. I'm doing some quotes in the here. But that's how it feels, right? And so how do you, when you're talking to your teenager, or maybe it's even a teen that you mentor, how do you help them maybe grasp what social media is, how it's affecting them?
That's a hard one. Because a little bit of a loaded question.
Yeah.
I'm honestly, at the end of the day, I'm not sure you're going to convince teenagers. And that's why I think it's so important that the parents, guardians, they're the ones that have to be the bad guys. And that stinks, but it's true. So yeah, we're the ones that got to set those boundaries. I don't think the teens will fully understand. I think we should continue to talk about it and explain like what's happening in their brains and why we care. Like it's not that we're just trying to be the big bad guy, but we want them to spend more time with people and go into the world and have a job where they're not afraid to talk to their boss about an issue because they prefer to just send them an email. or whatever it is, like just that social anxiety that comes along with less time with people. So I think we should explain it to them. I don't think we should expect them to understand it right away. I think that'll be like 10 years later when they come back and they're like, thanks for doing this, mom and dad.
Yeah.
Thank you for actually making me stop using that, because they're teenagers.
So is there like guidelines or recommendations for when, like if you're a parent, you don't, your teen, you maybe like you, right? You have younger kids, and it's like, when will you let them use social media? Or maybe I don't have to be specific on you, but like, is there a recommendation? Maybe you're like, they're never touching it while they're in my house. I don't know. Yeah. But what's maybe some guidelines or best practices when it comes to teens and social media use?
Yeah. I mean, not to go back to Hate's book again, but he's done a lot of research on it. So props to him. But he recommends 16 years old for social media. I think that that's a great idea. I know a lot of parents are thinking it's too late for that. But I don't think, I don't really fully buy into the it's too late concept at all when it comes to mental health. I know it's going to be harder to do it after the fact, but I think 16 is a great age because that's the age where their brains are finally getting through this like rigorous time from like 12 to 16 where they're developing more autonomy and trying to understand like their identity. If you guys have seen Inside Out 2, getting that identity kind of into the core memory there. So they're just kind of trying to figure out who they are, and social media I mean, it really throws a wrench in that, and it impacts just the way they view themselves. And just all the ads on there, I feel like, especially for young girls, are just geared towards self-image and just, making them feel terrible about themselves. And that's not going to help during that time, obviously. I recommend 16. I know that that's, for everyone to decide on their own. Everyone's going to be different, but if you can do it, do 16.
Well, and I think what's really cool about that too is that you're not saying, hey, once they're 18, then they have social media. It's like, no, there's a period of time in which you can kind of help and guide them as they're first utilizing social media. Yeah. Is there, I don't know if this is something that, you talk through with teens or parents or whatever, but is there a way to help, I don't want to say teach, but equip a teenager when they're first starting to get social media, maybe it's 16, whenever it is, to help them have like, maybe a healthier relationship with it and create some of those, I don't know if they're internal barriers or boundaries about the proper use of it or what that looks like.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think boundaries are key, which I think we should teach them about social media as well as like just all relationships and interactions with people. I think, as parents and other mentors in their lives, whoever's listening, I think, it's really about those boundaries. And I think we can model that as well. They're going to see us like interacting with our phones and things like that. And even if it's not on social media, they're seeing us interact. They can see us like, hey, at dinner, we put our phones down or whatever it is, like just setting those little boundaries more and more. And just showing them that life's not on the screen. Like you still do things outside of the screen and have those interactions. Like if you go on social media, you still can message your friend and talk to them in real life. As well as I think it's important to set those boundaries for teenagers. I feel like there's so many conflicts that I hear about that could just be resolved with a simple, like, did you ask so-and-so about that? Is that what they really think? Or is that just your perception? Like, talk to them in real life and just ask them. Just call them on the phone and say, is this what you meant? I think, that would resolve so much hurt on social media that I've seen with the teens. I'm like, this is a very silly he said, she said situation.
But I think it paints the picture, right? Is that there's like, I know entire generations that don't like talking on the phone. and would prefer to just text or maybe send a Snapchat or whatever. Send a snap. I don't think they even says send a Snapchat, but
I'm not cool. I don't know.
I'm dating myself right there. Yeah.
Right.
And that's the like preferred method of communication. That's how they interact with the world in some way. And so, but it comes with these challenges and barriers that kind of hurt relationships. And so I love the idea of like encouraging them to like take steps to move beyond that and having conversations about how do you interact? How do you have a phone call?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm definitely in the group of people that prefer texting over phone calls. Yeah. So I totally understand. But I also understand that sometimes you just have to be uncomfortable. And I think that that's what we need to teach our kids. Like, even when it's uncomfortable, if it's going to resolve the issue or at least diffuse it some, I think you just got to do it. Be uncomfortable. Yeah. And yeah, I think COVID kind of hurt that even more, where it's just so easy to avoid interacting with people. So yeah.
If you have a kid who's using technology, maybe it's social media, whatever it is, are there any red flags that would kind of show you that I need to connect my kid with a professional to really help them navigate through their tech use, or it could be mental health in general, but is there any like red flags you'd be concerned about, or I really want them to see a counselor about this?
Sure. Yeah, so I'd say it's a good question. I think it's tricky to identify because I think a lot of the mental health impacts are not going to be seen like directly while they're using technology, but I think you will see just the impact of like their anxiety, whether socially or just in general, as well as depression type symptoms. Those are the most common, I feel, that go with the technology use. So red flags for that are, I mean, with depression, you have like withdrawal from activities that they used to like. They might be crying more often, more distant, and then just pulling back more and more. Yeah, there's all sorts of symptoms, but I'd say the big ones are, just pulling back from things they like to do, potentially like sleeping more or sleeping less. And yeah, I don't know. For boys, sometimes it can come out as anger, as I feel like that's the stereotypical okay emotion for boys and men is that anger. So you might see more of like aggressive, angry type symptoms when it comes to depression, especially the younger the boy is. So they might just be getting in more fights or arguing with you more. Depending on the age, that might just be developmentally normal, just to clarify.
Yeah.
But it's just really things that seem outside of their typical like self. Again, you have changes through teenage years, but anything where you're like, okay, this is truly impacting how they're interacting with others. Anxiety symptoms could be like irritability. Again, with the social interactions, just refusal to like interact with people. Just not themselves, I guess.
No, I think that's really helpful.
Kind of hard to pinpoint for each kid. Yeah. It's going to be different, and it's kind of, unfortunately, you kind of just have to use your instincts, which I feel is like a terrible answer, but but kind of true. So
yeah, no, but I think they're really helpful, tangible things of like change of behavior and probably I'm guessing when you're like striving to have those types of conversations where you're kind of learning more about what how they are really doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll say too, just to clarify, teens are going to go through a little bit of that as well, where all of a sudden your baby is a teenager and you're going to be like, who is this kid? They are acting something totally different, which that is developmentally normal. But, maybe the parent needs to seek counseling.
Yeah.
Whew. Yeah. Parenting a teenager is no joke. So.
Well, and maybe I should have asked this question right at the start. But maybe we can end with it. You are getting a chance to work right in the schools with teenagers. And, I don't know what's the feeling like? How are teenagers doing? Like, how are they navigating through that stuff? Is there anything that, parents would be surprised to learn, or maybe haven't had a chance to realize, have misconceptions about? Maybe just an open-ended section here for you to share. Like, what have you been experiencing and learning through that?
Yeah, I think, what I've seen a lot of is just a lot of hurt, a lot of struggle out there just to be a teenager and try to navigate all of the different drama, which I know as parents can seem just really dumb, because frankly, it kind of is dumb sometimes. But for them, that's their biggest thing right now, who's dating who and whatever's going on in the school. That's their biggest thing. Like, they don't have a bigger world outside of that at this point. So that is what's most important, is those social interactions and those social media interactions. So it feels so big to them. So I think they just get really into those things, and they just, there's a lot of hurt with that, as well as I've talked to so many kids, which was kind of surprising to me. And they do a lot of work on their Chromebooks, and they get a lot of, when they get downtime, like where they get to play on their Chromebooks, but all of them seem to kind of hate their Chromebook time, which I thought was interesting. They don't want to lose it, but they also hate doing work on there. Like, everybody hates doing work, and they wish they would do it paper and pencil. And I think that that's just really interesting.
That is interesting.
I'm like, okay, so you guys kind of understand that it's not maybe healthy to be on your computer all day long. But they can't quite stop themselves, which is where, the adults got to come in, unfortunately. Yeah. Terrible role for us, but be the back end.
Not the most fun to be the tech police.
Right.
Yeah. Well, hey, I know you have, it's super exciting, a Teens in Tech seminar that you're doing at the Ridge coming up here. Maybe you could give just a quick flyover of what you're going to be sharing and how parents can come join.
Yeah. So that one will go more into depth of kind of some of the risks and dangers, more specifics, not just about pornography, but technology in general, social media. It is targeted towards parents of teenagers, or preteens would be good too. And I will dive into kind of some steps, more specific steps of what parents can do in response, and how they can kind of set some boundaries, lead by example, and just show your kid unconditional love, which can be hard to do in those teen years. So we kind of dive into a little bit of everything, give some practical tools, some resources at the end too, because I feel like parents of teens need a support group.
Right. Yeah.
Something, honestly though.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for joining and sharing all the wisdom and the things that you're learning, and just some practical things that we can do to help maybe even understand what kids and teens are going through with tech use, but then also how do we share and help them get through and learn how to use technology in a responsible way. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, that was my conversation with Isa, and I just want to thank her again for sharing her insight and practical steps and thoughts on how to help kids and teens with technology. I want to encourage you to check out the seminar, Teens in Tech. I think it's really going to be helpful to give practical steps and advice on how to help your teenagers navigate through the challenging, maybe boundaries and first steps using technology, and how do you do it in a healthy way. So check out that seminar. You can find all the details as well as register for it in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.